I thought it might be kind of funny that I'm introducing a man that I feel doesn't really need an introduction, but it's such an honor to me. I asked him if he would allow me to introduce him. This is Mr. Guy Stevens. He's a resident here with us at Magnolia Springs East, and he's going to share about his experiences as a POW, prisoner of war, during the Second World War. And he's not going to be talking about the combat, he's going to be talking about what the experience was from capture on. And so I feel absolutely honored to be able to serve Guy and really every one of you all. And it's just, I don't have words to express how thankful I am for how many gave so much. And so I appreciate you all for coming to hear this very powerful presentation. And so without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Guy. And thank you again, Guy, for your willingness to share.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's
set up for you. Sorry
kind of a nervous situation, but I normally talk before a younger crowd when I used to give talks to the high school groups and whatnot. But anyway, I'm speaking. I like to think I'm speaking for all veterans, because this room is filled with veterans, and a lot of you saw more than I did. But each one of us has our own experience. We have our own horrors and whatnot that we went through to keep this country free, and I like to share mine with you. My mother kept me out of school until I was 7. We were country people, and so I went to a 1-room school or 2-room school to start with at 7 years old. So when I got to be a senior in high school, I became 18. I was always about a year older than my classmates, and so my birthday's in October, and right after my birthday, I had a letter from Uncle Sam said, "Greetings. Your friends and neighbors want you to serve his service." So on December the 10th, I left the high school. I had 30 credits out of, I needed 32, but they said the other 2 credits I need was in phys ed, and they would go ahead and grant those. The school administration did. So my mother picked my diploma up that next spring. But anyway, I went from there to Camp Croft, South Carolina for basic. Then they shipped me off to Camp Shelby, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, for some extra training. They called it combat intelligence, how to recognize the German uniforms and what rank they would hold and their equipment and this and that. So I stayed there for quite a while, and then they trained us all. We all rolled trains and went to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, where our division was formed, the 106th Golden Line Division. And so we trained there and became organized as battalions and regiments and squads and platoons. And so I had a friend that he became a dear friend from Brighton, Massachusetts. He was 38 years old, and he had a laundry and a wife and 2 children, but they was getting kind of desperate. I think they raised it all the way from 18 up to 38 he was. So he looked at me as a son, but he was a small man, and I was a big old rough country boy. So I dug the foxholes and different things, and he was Catholic, and he prayed the rosary, and I think that's what saved us as it come out later. But anyway, we left Camp Atterbury and went to New York and got on the Queen Elizabeth, and we went across the Atlantic without an escort because it could outrun any submarine. But we did run the zigzag course, and a dirigible followed us out for about the first day, and then they turned around and came back. But so we made the 5-day trip over to landed at Liverpool, went into England for some more training, went to London, and while I was in London, the buzz bombs came in. Germany had the buzz bombs, and they would come over. As long as you could hear the buzzing going on, you were all right, but when the buzzing stopped, the thing came down, and everybody ran for the air raid shelters then. So then we boarded the ship and crossed the channel and landed at Le Havre, France. And that's where it already had been fought and bombed and everything else. It was a city that was completely destroyed. We went up through France, Luxembourg, Belgium. I visited with a Belgian family and saw them make that big pumpernickel bread about the size of a big dish pan. And they had their cows and stuff in one room off the house, and the workshop in another one. And then they took us from there and put us in the Ardennes forest. Our division went up into Ardennes forest, and it had been a quiet sector for quite a while, and they put us up there, and our division covered 28 square miles of just keeping it secure. And on the December the 16th, unbeknownst to everybody, the intelligence and surely us, a bunch of 19-year-old kids with our leaders, and they had put down straw and stuff on the road so they could move their equipment up and get it organized for this big Belgian breakthrough that was going to happen December the 16th. We got there on December the 10th and had about 6 days to sort of see it. We went on night patrols, and everything was so snowy, and my gosh, it was cold. And our fingers and everything was so darn cold, and we all had overshoes on over our combat boots, and it was foggy. My gosh, about the 15th or 14th or 15th, it became so foggy you could hardly see in that forest, and everything was covered with snow. And on the morning of the 16th, we were there, about ready to have a little breakfast, and all of a sudden here came the artillery and whistling through the trees and going off, and we all hit our foxholes, and this Edward Barley, Eddie, as I called him, he jumped in the foxhole first, and I jumped in on top of him, and my big old bottom stuck up. But anyway, that was when the Belgian Bulge started. I was there when the first artillery came in, and that was December the 16th of '44. And then wasn't too long, we heard the rumbling of the tanks coming. They had those German Tiger tanks, and they were hellacious. And then the German soldiers, a lot of the infantrymen were dressed in white uniforms, and being foggy and the snow on the ground, it was hard to really pick them out. But we could see them down through the forest coming, and here later on we could see some of our jeeps. We thought that was our men, but the Germans in previous battles had captured our equipment and our uniforms and whatnot to take off the prisoners and put them on naked. And they were, you couldn't tell friend from foe. But and we found out that we were outnumbered about 10 to 1. So it wasn't long before they came up through there, and all we could do was fire some shots at them and make them hunker down while we could try to go to a different location. But when we got to that different location, they were there too. And we tried to go this way, and they were there. And we just kept, even tried to retreat, go backwards. And they had already encircled us between the tanks and the infantry. They encircled the Ardennes forest where we all were. And that was on the 16th. And we kept them, like I said, they kept coming through us between the infantry and the tanks. And the tanks had those 88 millimeter artillery cannons on them. And my gosh, they could shoot them like a rifle. I grew up on a farm, and we had guns since I was 13, and so I know what that's like. But if they'd see 3 or 4 of you together in a spot, well, they'd shoot them things, and and they'd come whistling through there, and you'd hit the ground, and sometimes it'd be a tree burst. It'd hit up the top of a tree and go off, and sometimes it'd hit the ground and go off. So it was just a helter-skelter thing. So we kept that up for 4 days, just trying to keep from getting killed and keeping them at bay, firing off our shots and throwing grenades if we could do something to scare them away or maybe bring some injury. And so on the 19th, we were out of ammunition, hadn't eaten for about 3 days, and we were down in the valley, 17 of us. I wasn't even with my own group. Edward Morley stuck with me, but we were down there, and they had their tanks up on had a tank up on the ridge, and some riflemen, and they were shooting down at us, and there wasn't much to hide behind except a tree or whatnot. And my overshoes the days before had filled up with snow and whatnot, and the heat from my body, I guess, melted it, and then they froze. So I ended up with terribly frozen feet, and I still, you'd have to see my feet to know just how bad they are. But anyway, the sergeant, he was the highest ranking man in our 17 group, and we all had our bayonets fixed since we were out of grenades and out of ammunition. And he took a white piece of garment, I don't know if it was his white undershirt or a white handkerchief, or I don't know what kind of a piece of white cloth he had, but he put it on his bayonet, and he went walking up towards the enemy with that waving back and forth, and he was gone, and they stopped shooting, and so they came back. He came back in about 30 minutes and said they will accept our surrender. Said, get everything out of your pockets, throw down all your weapons, anything else you've got. If you got any German artifacts you might have taken off of somebody, why, put them, get rid of them, because they're a death sentence. And so, and put your hands on top of your head or your helmets and follow me. So we all went up through following him up the hill, and then we got to look the Germans right in the face, and some of them were my age and some were older and whatnot, and they frisked us and looked down and got us all kind of scattered over here, bunched up over here in a pile, and then they started marching us. And they marched us until we got to a barnyard. It was about dark then, so we slept in the barnyard, and to keep warm, we'd sleep stomach to back, and then every once in a while someone say switch, and you turn over, let them lay up against your back, and you'd face the other direction. And so we kept that up, and still hadn't had anything to eat. And snow, you could get some of that and put in your mouth for moisture, and so we kept going and did that. That was in the evening of the 19th, and then we walked the day of the 20th, and got to another farmyard at dark, and laid down the same way. And then the 21st, it kind of gets a little bit fuzzy here, but we did about the same thing. Then they got us to a railroad yards, and they put us in boxcars. They were actually what they hauled cattle and horses in. They had some straw on the floor with excrement mixed in with the straw, and they packed 70 of us in to each boxcar, and that was just all we could do to stand up. Then they slammed the door on us, and we kind of divided ourselves up from the middle of that door, which is the center of the car, and we say, let's back up from this point and squeeze back to the wall and let this other group sit down. And so that they sat down for about 30 minutes, then we said, someone said it's time to change. So they stood up and they squeezed back against the wall and let the rest of us sit down for about 30 minutes and to give our legs a rest. I forgot to tell you that on our march to the railroad yards, going to a small community, there's a lot of women and stuff lined up along the streets, and I guess they'd lost their husbands or sons or whatnot, but you could tell that they hated us. And I had my overshoes, my feet had gotten warm from having my combat boots on and overshoes too, so I'd put them over my shoulder, and one of the ladies ran out there and grabbed them and took them off my shoulder, and I didn't need them anyway at that time, so that's where the overshoes went. But we got in the train, and they moved us. After we sat there for quite a while, they did give us a little bit of marmalade and I believe a little chunk of cheese when they got us in the boxcar. Each one of us got that there, so that was our first nourishment, and it tasted like heaven to us. Anyway, we got in the boxcar and we went a ways, and December the 24th, Christmas Eve, they had us parked on a railroad siding, and it was Koblenz, Germany, and it was getting towards evening. We could hear even some children outside, and it seemed like everybody was happy, and the guards, we could hear them talking, and all of a sudden the air raid sirens went off. It's just about dark, and they started talking excitedly, and the kids and everybody started running, and everything got deathly quiet. Then it wasn't long we heard the airplanes coming, the RAF from England. They did their bombing at night, and the U.S. did theirs in the daytime. So they came over and bombed this railroad yard where we were parked in our train. And I was most terrified I was in all the other stuff that went on in the Ardennes, because you're jammed up in a boxcar and you hear these things screaming out of the sky, and just praying. We were all praying, and all of a sudden they'd go off when they hit the earth, and the old train would shake, and our boxcar would. And then here come another one, WWII, POW, and so I understand that hit one of the boxcars. I think there was about 7 boxcars with prisoners in it that they'd captured, and they had, they said it hit one car, or hit right beside one car, and there was people killed, some of the soldiers killed or injured, but we don't know because we were in this locked up car with no windows, nothing else to see. But next morning, they let it open the door and let us get out to relieve ourselves if we had to, but there's no need to. But we could see all the railroad tracks and the craters where the tracks were all wound up where the bombs had hit. And so we stayed there about another day until they got a track fixed up to get us out. Then we got on the train again, and about the 28th or 29th, they got us to a place, found out it's Bad Orb, Germany, and that's where our prison camp was going to be. So it was at nighttime. They got us out, lined us all up, and marched us up a road until up a hill, and then they was some big old barracks there, big old stone buildings, and that was to be home for the next going on 4 months. And so we got there and got in, and all we got was some of the people down the floor end of the building had a 2-stacker bunk bed, but the mattress was about 2 inches thick and it was filled full of Excelsior. It was kind of wood shavings, not straw, but Excelsior, they called it. And so that was our mattress and one blanket. And but Edward and I and a whole bunch of others had to sleep on the floor, so we had the mattress anyway between us and the concrete. And so we laid there, and next morning they came up and brought us a big container. They called it ersatz tea, and it was foul tasting, but it was hot and liquid, so we drank it. and then they didn't have any utensils for us to drink out of or anything, so I used my helmet, and I gave another person that didn't have a helmet, and I'd lost it or something, but the helmet liner is kind of a fiberglass thing that goes inside your steel helmet to protect your head, and it's got some straps on it, and so got them cut out of there and gave it to him, but I ate out of my helmet, drank my ersatz tea out of it, and that was going to be my eating utensil and drinking utensil for the next 3.5 months. So but then at noon, they lined us all up and whatever container. Now some of the fellows had still kept their eating utensil, their mess kit, and so that was the Cadillac for somebody that had a mess kit. But you go by this kitchen down there, and they would take a load down, a great big vat in there that looks something like they make burgoo soup at the churches when they make it, and you'd hold up whatever you have to put it in, and they'd dip that big old ladle down in there and slop it out there into your container, and you go back to your building and sup it out of it or take your fingers. We called it grass soup because it's made out of turnip tops and potato peelings, and sometimes it has some grits in it and whatnot, and so that was what we had for lunch. And then in the evening, they'd bring up a loaf of bread, a German black bread. It's about that long, 6 or 7 inches long. It's made in a mold, I guess. And you know how bread is, kind of slopes off the ends. We had a stick made that was exactly 1/6 of the length of the bread. And so today you and I would get the heels. Tomorrow we'd move in a step and get the next slice, which is a little taller, same width, but the third day we look forward to because it was tallest. And so then the next day we'd fall back to the heel again. But that was our daily menu. A cup of ersatz tea in the morning, whatever they called soup at noon, and then we had our bread in the afternoon and the evening. And but don't want to lose my continuity here. Anyway. About the 5th day we were there, one night we were laying there trying to get some sleep or doing something. And anyway, it was about 10 o'clock or 9. We heard the bloodhounds obeying, and they came right up to our building. And a lot of excited German talk outside. And so they got us up and marched us all outside and lined us up and had us to hold our hands up, and then they took a flashlight and looked us all over. And so after about an hour of that, well, they let us go back inside, and that was it. But next morning we didn't get our ersatz tea, and so they got us all back out about 10 o'clock in the morning, I guess. It was about mid-morning, and they took us and marched us down to kind of a valley, and they had machine guns lined up on tripods. Had 2 of them there, and a lot of officers. And one of the officers, he could speak perfect English, and he said, "I tell you why. If you don't know why we're here, you notice you didn't get any beverage this morning or ersatz tea, but said." Somebody from your building, because our bloodhounds traced it to your building, came down to the kitchen and used a hatchet and killed the guard that was guarding the kitchen. And so we couldn't find any blood on anybody when we searched you last night. And he said, until we do, we're not going to look anymore until we those people turn themselves in or you turn them in, why, I said, you get no more tea in the morning, you get no more soup, you get no more bread. It's just your decision. So we went 2 days without eating anything, and 2 fellows from the far end of the building came up and said they were going to turn themselves in. The reason they couldn't find any blood, they had their jackets on, and when they went outside to be inspected, they took it off. And so they couldn't find anything that was discriminating. And so they took them off, and they said they had a special camp to put people like that. So I could only imagine what happened to them. Never did find out. But wasn't too long after they did that, here came our tea, and you got to go down and get our soup, and you got to get our bread. And so we came out of that all right. But then every once in a while, in any organization, some of the fellows, well, very few fellows could speak German good, and they made friends with our guards, and our guard was a small man, and he probably was in his 50s or maybe early 60s. He was too old to be sent to the front lines to fight, so they made a prison guard out of him. And so if you had a watch that you happened to save or whatnot, he could they'd take that and say, you know, I can get you 2-pack of that interpreter, we called him, one of our men who could speak German, that had made friends with the guard. He said, I can get you 2 packs of cigarettes for that. The money was worthless in that place. It was, but cigarettes now, that was a different picture, because these people who had smoked all their lives and were nicotine fiends, they would die for a cigarette, and in fact some of them did before it's over. But so you give him your watch, and I didn't have one, so I wasn't involved. But give him a watch, he'd come back and give you a pack of cigarettes. And during meal time, might be soup time, might be bread time. Anyway, you'd walk down through the building and hold up a cigarette and say, what will you give me for a cigarette? And some fellow would say, I'll give you half of my soup ration. And somebody else would say, I'll give you half my soup ration and half of my bread ration. And they'd make the best deal and give them a cigarette. And I've seen them smoking. I didn't smoke, thank God, but they'd hold them and they'd suck them down to where we said the ashes fell behind their teeth. They just didn't want to lose a speck of that there tobacco. But thank God I didn't take part in that. Jumping ahead a little bit, latter part of March, or middle part of March, these people would die usually. And if you've seen the pictures that Mark brought that I got a hold of, this one fellow lost 100 pounds in 100 days off the diet. He was probably a smoker too. I didn't know the gentleman, but he was in our camp in one of the other buildings. Jumping ahead a little bit more too, I was 178 pounds when I was captured. That was always what I called my fighting weight. And when they finally weighed me, when we got released, why, I weighed 128, so I lost 50 pounds. And I just wasn't getting any vitamins at all, not much nutrition at all. And but anyway, we had to get put on a burial detail, and in that frozen ground, that was a hard job. We had a little cemetery outside the camp that we had to put our comrades in. And but anyway, about the last part of March, we could hear guns going off and stuff off in the distance. And so we knew that our being liberated is going to be pretty close. And one day, we heard the airplanes flying over and the machine guns going off, and got to go outside. And I did, a couple of us from our area of the building, and see a P-47 was on the tail end of either I don't know, Messerschmitt or a Schnauzer or whatever. I don't know the German planes, even though I took, and supposed to learn to identify them, but because he was down over the treetops and smoke was building down the back of it, but where they had shot, this P-47 was behind him, and bam, 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 in that snow where the tracers would hit, you could see steam coming up out of the snow. And so we knew it was getting close, and April the 1st, all of our guards and stuff took off. They picked up their belongings and got the heck out of there, because we could hear a rifle fire and all kinds of fighting going on right down in the valley from our camp. And on April the 2nd, they came up and a tank pushed open the gate of our camp, and of course we had no guard, and they started throwing out sea rations and maybe some candy and stuff like that, and skinny guys would run out there and fight like the dogs over at their piece on the floor. I thought that's kind of cruel of the liberators to do that. I think it was the 44th Division that liberated us, excuse me. But but anyway, talk about some sick guys. That night, they would get, whoever got the goodie would take off and run around the building just like a dog and grab the bone. Oh, I forgot to tell you too about the soup. This is kind of funny in a way, even though then it wasn't. And back then, we talked about girlfriends if you had one and whatnot, but you didn't talk about anything further than that. It's always mom's cooking. Mom made this, mom's this and that, no. So we would swap recipes. We'd make up our own recipe, like take a chocolate bar, Milky Way, cut it in half, put a weenie inside of it, make a sandwich out of it, and we always had peanut butter involved. So we just kept making up recipes. That's all we talked about. Because the two biological drives a person has is you got to have something to drink, you got to have something to eat, and if you don't have those, nothing else matters. So I'm sure I've left out a few things, but I'm just kind of breezing on it. Oh, the soup. Yeah, one time, every time one of our horses would die, because the Germans didn't have anything back then. See, this was in the first part of 45, and the Germans surrendered in May of 45. So we had the complete dominance of the air, and they were pulling their stuff around with horses or a mule or whatever, and they would, every once in a while, one of them would get hit or killed, and we'd have some meat and stuff in our soup, and I think they kept the meat for themselves, but they would throw the bones and stuff in that big vat and mix it in with their grass soup or whatever the tops were made out of, and they would take that ladle and dip down in there, and you'd see that bone sticking out of the ladle. And you say, oh, I hope it doesn't fall out, but it'd fall out and plop back in the vat. But every once in a while, someone was lucky, and it was one of your buddies. That was just about as good, or next thing, as you getting it, because he would take it and break that bone in half, and suck the marrow out of it, because we were starving for the meat flavor. I know my own self. We had leather belts on it, and I would chew on the end of my belt just to get a kind of a meat taste, starving to death. And But after your buddy got done with that, after a day or two, well, he'd give it to his best friend, and so you'd work on it for a while, and that was quite a treat. But then, after we were liberated, we had to stay in our building, and boy, it was a lot of irping and going on stuff during the night for the ones that got some of that rich stuff that our liberators had thrown out. And on about the second day, then they got some trucks up there and loaded us on. And all the time, when I went to the Ardennes forest on the 10th, until I got liberated in April, I'd never been out of my clothes. There was no such thing as a shower, a shave, or anything. So the clothes I was captured in was what I was liberated in. Never had been off my body. But they had other visitors too, because the place, our beds and stuff, was riddled with bed bugs, head lice, and body lice. You'd sit out on a Sunday morning and open up your shirt or something, and you'd see them rows of nits, white nits, where they'd lay their eggs and stuff. And just trying to sleep at night, you just sit there and scratch, scratch, scratch. And so anybody that knows me, I said if I ever get out of this, I'm never going to be dirty again and scrouty. So I take a shower every day, and I stay in at least a half an hour each time. I never will forget what it's like to be filthy. And but anyway, they got us. In our bathroom was a latrine, and it was just a hole in the ground with a log laying over across the top, over a forked thing at each end. It was about 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, and you just go up and plop across that bottom. That was our commode, so if you needed it. And my buddy Edward Morley was up there that day that the dogfight was going on, and he was up there, and plane came over, bam, 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 bam. He jumped off in that thing. And he came in the building, and he's all about a mess. Boy, he just was reeking. But, and you couldn't take his clothes off, but there's nothing else to put on, and nothing to wash off with, so poor Edward. And we took outside and got sticks and everything, tried to break it off of him, and but that's a kind of a humorous thing that happened. It wasn't too humorous at the time. He said, "Golly, guy," said, I thought they were shooting at me." Yeah, that I can't talk like the people from Brighton, Mass, but they had their own dialect. But anyway, they loaded us on a truck and drove us out to the airport, drove us out to a tent city. They had set up tents. That's how come we left us there for 2 days in the barracks. But they set up tents, and we had to take everything off at the first tent, everything, naked as a jaybird, and leave all the old filthy stuff on the ground. You go into the first tent, and they deloused us. You'd hold your arms up and everything. They had the big spray gun, and they would spray all over your body, trying to kill those nits and the bugs and everything like that. Then you go into the next tent, they had portable shower set up. My gosh, that was going to heaven then. You go in and shower and wash your hair and all parts of your body, and with some strong soap and whatever they had first to use, and then go in the next room, and they issued some underwear and some fatigues, and go in the next one and get your shoes and socks and whatnot. And then after that, why, they put us on a truck again and drove us to a small airfield, and there was some C-47 there, and they loaded us on it and took us to France, flew us to France, and the hospital was called Camp Lucky Strike. it's funny that they named the hospital after cigarettes, but it was called Camp Lucky Strike, and that's where they weighed us, and they said I weighed 128 pounds, and just have a big frame, and just elbows and knees, but went through all that good, and they said our stomachs had shrunken up to about the size of your fist, and if we let you guys go on your own, you get out and pig out or gorge yourself, and that would kill you. So we were in a place, and they gave us just a small breakfast. About 10 o'clock, they give us another meal, small meal. At noon, another one, and at 3 o'clock, another one, and maybe 6 or 7 in the evening, another one. And just little by little, just keep increasing it, and they said that would get your stomach stretched out like it should be. And so they did that. I stayed there for a month, and then they took and put us on a ship, and I was in the middle of the Atlantic coming home on a Liberty ship, and I got sick going over on the Queen Elizabeth, and I got sick coming back on because I'm not much of a sea traveler, and there's nothing like being seasick. But about halfway home, the news came over the ship's radio that Germany had surrendered. That was good news. So I got home, when I got back to the States, they sent me home for a 90-day furlough, and after that they sent me to Miami, Florida for a 2-week vacation at the hotel there on the beach with my own swimming pool, with our own swimming pool, the other guys, and they had spread out a whole bunch of different hotels, but at night we would go in a place called Charlie's Inn, I believe it was, and instead of clapping at the performers, they had sticks with a wooden ball on the end of it. So instead of clapping when they performed, when it was over, you just took and beat them on the table. And I was there when the news came over that Japan had surrendered. So I had 2 beautiful surprises. Germany surrendered on the way home, Japan surrendered, and thank God they did, because if we had to fight them on their homeland, I don't know how many thousands would have lost their lives on both sides. So I believe, Pat, can you think of anything else you've heard me give it once or twice? Oh, yeah, that's right. I got discharged on November the 29th of 45, and I got married on April 24th of 46. And I said, I was so used to fighting and taking orders, I said, hell, I'm just going to get married. I found the perfect mate. So, I believe that's about it. Pardon? Oh, the Purple Heart, I got a piece of shrapnel off of one of those 88s, came through my legs, came through my thigh, and didn't hit a bone. It just left a scar about like that. It just went in like that, because one of their artilleries, as they shot it down, I hit, kind of laid uphill. I lifted, thank God I didn't have my helmet strap underneath my chin, because when that thing went off right behind my feet, it took my helmet and blew it up the hill about 10 or 12 feet, and just a concussion from it. But I believe that was it. That was where I got the, down there.
Very good.
Yeah.
How many survived
How many survived?
of your group?
I don't have that answer. I don't have that answer. Edward did. I believe him praying the rosary. I don't think he ever fired a shot, because every time the thing got serious, during that 4 days in the Ardennes, he was praying the rosary. And I wasn't a Catholic then. I married a Catholic girl and took the catechism and reverted over, but poor Edward, he didn't belong there for sure. But he was kind of my substitute dad, and I was his son or something, I guess, because I dug the foxholes And I just kind of took care of Edward, and
Did y'all keep
he prayed for me, so.
Did y'all keep in contact with each other?
We did for a while after that, but then it's like everything else, I started having children, and oh, the good news about all this, I was just a poor country boy with a high school education. Mom and Dad said that's as far as I can take you 6 kids. All of us got a high school education, but the GI Bill, I started college on a GI Bill, and it paid for I got a job as I majored in education, elementary education. I got my license in kindergarten through 8th grade. And it took me 8 years to get my degree, because about that time, I was married and we had our first child, and Survell was hiring welder. That was a refrigerator company, and I had learned to stick weld or acetylene weld in high school, because I thought I was always going to work with my hands. So I took up a vocational thing rather than an academic line of schooling. I don't know anything about chemistry or Latin or any of that. I just knew how to work with wood. I took manual training, and I also learned how to weld. So I went and tried out for welding, and they hired me for the 2nd shift. So I go to college in the morning, and I had to be at work at 2:30. So I'd change clothes either in the college bathroom, or wait till I got to Survell, went to their bathroom and took off I only had about 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts. I couldn't afford to get in one of them dirty, so then I welded till 11 o'clock at night, get home, get up next morning, go again. So I did that for 8 years and got my bachelor's degree, and I got hired right in my own community. Taught fourth grade the first year, then the 8th grade teacher left, and I got his job in 8th grade, all subjects. Back then, in a country school, you teach 1 grade, all subjects, and so I had 8th grade, and I was also the coach, and so I had a beautiful experience teaching, and 4 years later, they got rid of the principal and the trustee. I was under a trusteeship then. He asked me, he said, "God, would you be willing to be the principal?" So everybody says, "You're doing a great job, and we'd like for you to be the principal." And so I did, and so I stayed in that one school for 34 years. So the kids I taught became the mothers of children we taught, and became the grandparents of children we taught. And I knew all of them by name, and it was a beautiful experience, and God's been good to me. I owe him all the credit, and I thank him every day and every night for letting me come back and have a life. Any more questions?
You said there were like 70 people in each boxcar, and approximately 7 of them, so if you do the math on that. And when everybody came out of there and started going through those tents, did it appear to be as many as went in, or did it appear to be much, much less?
It's hard to answer. I was just chatting with myself and Edward. We just went in a tent, and not knowing. I know it was what our plane had, and I didn't know how many planes were flying. I just know it was my first trip in a plane, because that's the reason I took the infantry, because I had a chance to go in the Air Corps, and I had a chance to go in the Navy, but I wanted to keep my feet on terra firma. The more firm, the less terror. And another thing about college, I was there 8 years, and some of them thought I was a professor, I think, because I'd already been to war and back, and a lot of these years, my classmates were just kids out of high school that went right into it. And so I told people, after I finally got my degree, after 8 years, I said some of my classmates graduated magna cum laude, some graduated cum laude, I graduated thank you laude. Yes, I went to Evansville College. It was Evansville College back then. We had quarter hours, and then later on became a university. Ordinarily, back in the beginning of the war, the Red Cross from Geneva, every prisoner of war got one Red Cross parcel once a month. You got months, and it had cube sugar in it, a box of cube sugar, raisins, and some marmalade, peanut butter, a whole gob of stuff in that box. It'd be delicious, but they gave us one box, and it came out for each 17 guys. So we got 17. In fact, I've got a picture back in my room of us that you go there, and that was a beautiful meal. A raisin for you, and a raisin for you, and a raisin, another raisin, and then a cube of sugar, and piece of cheese, and this kept going, and you had a nice handful of stuffing, and man, I slept good that night, because we scarfed it all up, and but that was my experience with the Red Cross parcels. We got one the time I was there, and that was divided up among 17 of us. But at the beginning, I don't have any great animosity towards the Germans, the German people proper. They're good people, and a lot of us have a German lineage that they're good people. But it was Hitler and his close surroundings that did what they did to the Jews and all the other. In fact, they had orders out before you would force German surrenders. You're supposed to kill all the prisoners of war. And one of our guards, the old guard, told the interpreter that, said, we had orders from Hitler's headquarters to kill all POWs before we would let you be liberated. But he said, we can't do that. He said, the war's not over. And in fact, this one guard we had, through an interpreter, said at the beginning of the war, early part of the war, his own son was captured by the Americans, and he was in California. And back when they could get letters back and forth, he said his son said he loved it there. They were treating him so good. He's picked up some weight. He gets a beer ration a week. He gets to see a movie or two a week, and he eats good and got this and this and this. And he said, if I had it in my power to give you fellows anything at all, he said, I would. He said, we just don't have it ourselves. We just don't have it. So I have no animosity. I don't have any deep hatred. And a lot of the guys we were fighting were kids my age. We were all 19-year-old kids, and that's what we were. 19 and 20 years old. And war is a hellacious thing. Yeah, I wear a 22 size.
Hey, Gunner, when y'all was captured, did you have any Jewish prisoners?
Yeah. In fact, they did separate the ones that were Jewish.
They did?
And they sent them to a special camp, they said. Yeah, that's a good question. That's never been asked before. It's a good question.
Did you ever see any of them again?
No. No. That's the funny thing about the service, you know, they usually, when they organize a division or whatnot, they take people from all the states and put together. They don't put you together just in a clump. That makes it look so sad when this man is killed or this man is wounded. So you don't really get to know. I know when I was in the PW camp, someone said, Guy, in this next barracks down the street here, there's a fellow from Indiana there. Man, that's just like, hey, that's a relative maybe. So go down there and go in there and say, who's from Indiana? And some guy here, and go down, where are you from? Terre Haute, Indianapolis or whatnot, then you can talk about your home state, which was kind of a treat. But my mother, since we're just killing time just for a second, the first telegram she got from the government was telling her that her son was missing in action. And then she went until March, first part of March, she got another telegram saying that your son has been, he's a prisoner of war. So that made her feel better, but Dad said she turned white-headed. She was darker-headed, but said she turned white during that time, thinking about her baby son. Of us 4 boys, I was her youngest son. I was her little baby. But then, early part of April then, she got another telegram saying that your son has been released to the American government. And so that was two good messages. If you need to leave anybody, I mean, you're not hurting my feelings, just feel free to get out and about. Thanks a lot for coming and be so attentive, and I'm sure I left some things out. I spent yesterday the biggest part of the day making some little crib notes down through here, but I didn't refer to it once, partly because I have trouble reading my own writing.
Maybe because it's pretty well ingrained in your memory.
That's true when you can speak from memory. That's better than trying to memorize something somebody else did and then regurgitate it.
Yeah. I'll never forget a couple of times I've come up to your table and in either at lunch or at dinner and said, how's your dinner, how's your lunch? And you've always said, I'm never going to complain because I've had lots worse.
Yeah, we've had the table mates down there and somebody would say, I can't stand this food. They said it's gourmet and whatnot. I said, man, you never been there.